We did begin kind of a mini-series last week on the Lord's Prayer. I just did kind of a brief introduction, and we will be in this teaching series within the Sermon on the Mount over the next 5 weeks or so. So what we did last week was we all stood and we recited the Lord's Prayer together. And I want us to do that every single week in this teaching series. So if you can, stand with me. And in unity and in oneness, hold the person's hand beside of you. And we are going to recite the Lord's Prayer together as one voice and one body together. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. I'm going to start off by throwing you a curveball this morning. This is actually not the Lord's Prayer. Shocker. Major curveball. This is not the Lord's Prayer. The Lord's Prayer is actually found in John 17, the night before his crucifixion. Most scholars refer to this prayer as the disciples' prayer. As the disciples' prayer. The Lord himself says, this is how you should pray. This is how we are to pray. This is the prayer of the disciples, of kingdom people. By the early 2nd century, or the late 1st century, the Didache, which just means teaching, which some believe to be the oldest catechism of the church, documenting certain doctrines and practices of the early church, called followers of Jesus to pray this prayer, the disciples' prayer, 3 times a day. 3 times a day to pray this prayer, which was a rhythm quite familiar to ancient Jews and eventually familiar with early church in the Eastern and even the Western tradition, both the Orthodox tradition and in the Roman Catholic tradition, or the monastic tradition. Praying 3 times a day became known as praying the daily office. Praying the daily office, a morning, noon, and night prayer rhythm. And here's why this is important for us as we consider our rhythm of prayer within our rhythm of life, or our rule of life, our communal rhythm at Emmaus. The first thing with respect to this prayer is that you have a written prayer you can always pray. I know that many of us struggle with prayer. There are a few people in this space who just honestly love prayer. I realize that. But the beautiful thing with this, and as seen modeled in the early church, is that we actually have a written prayer that we can always pray. When you don't know what to pray, we have a written prayer to pray, let alone all of the Psalms that we can pray. Habitual prayers anchor us. Written, habitual, rhythmic prayers anchor us. Ancient Jews prayed them. Early Christians prayed them. And Jesus prayed them. In fact, some believe this prayer parallels an ancient Jewish prayer that Jesus would have known called the Kaddish. The Kaddish. I would encourage you to go look it up later this afternoon. You will see the parallel between the disciples' prayer here and the Kaddish. In Luke's account, Jesus in the Greek is basically saying to them as they ask him, would you teach us how to pray, Lord? He tells them, basically, when you pray, recite these words. Say these words. Recite them. So if you struggle with knowing how to pray or even what to pray, we have a written prayer that we can always pray in rhythm. Morning, noon, and night. I would encourage you to consider the disciples' prayer as a starting point of exploring the world that is prayer. The second thing that's important for us is that in the disciples' prayer, or the Lord's Prayer, you have a model for how to pray. A model for how to pray. The text says, this then is how you should pray. Or the New American Standard says, pray in this way. In other words, use this model to pray. Yes, we can recite these words, but it also provides for us a model and a launching point into various ways of praying. So it functions both as a what and a how. A what and a how. What to pray and how to pray. We have both in the disciples' prayer. And there's a very clear distinction and delineation of sections within the 7 lines of the disciples' prayer, providing, as I said, this launching point or this gateway. I mentioned last week that the disciples' prayer functions more like a toolbox, and prayer in general functions more like a toolbox rather than a single tool. And in it, we see at least 4 different types of prayer: adoration, intercession, petition, and confession. Pete Greig and the 24/7 prayer movement, which we are big fans of here at Emmaus. If you're not familiar with 24/7 prayer, go do some Googling this afternoon. It's phenomenal. And they have prayer rooms all across the world. And that's a desire and dream that I've had for this place, is that we would have a prayer room, that we would move towards a place of having a 24/7 prayer cycle at some point throughout the year. So if you want something to dream into, to pray into, to seek after, maybe that's going to stoke someone in this room right now. I want to see 24/7 prayer happen in this community. But they have this fantastic little acronym that I think is much more succinct and is easy to remember for us as we consider what does it mean to pray, or how do we pray. And they use the word pray, P-R-A-Y. Pause, rejoice, ask, yield. P-R-A-Y. Pause, rejoice, ask, yield. Provides the entire basis of not only the disciples' prayer, but all the types of prayer that we see throughout the story of God laid out in the Scriptures. So over the next few weeks in this mini-series, we will walk through and practice these various types of prayer. Because I want, and I know a remnant of you want, a culture of seeking after God by the means and through the means of prayer. To be a praying community. We don't just pray, but I want us to be a praying people and to have a culture of prayer. But notice the first invitation in this PRAY acronym. It is the invitation to pause. To pause. The prayer for us provides, the disciples' prayer that is, both a what and a how, as I mentioned, but taken in context of the larger Sermon on the Mount and the preceding teachings right before it, Jesus also gives direction on a where and a when. These next few weeks are going to be all about how to pray. We see a what, we see the model, we see a how, but right before it, we see a where and a when given by Jesus. Matthew 6:6. But when you pray. When you pray. Notice that it isn't if you pray, but when you pray. We learn to play by playing. We learn to draw by drawing. We learn to pray by praying. That is how we learn to pray. On-the-job training. Getting our hands dirty. Getting in the sandbox. Getting a paintbrush. Seeing what happens. That is how we learn to pray. And we learn through repetition and reiteration. That is how we learn. We do it over and over and over again. Some of you have learned specific forms of art over your lifetime, and you have gotten to a place of proficiency where you know how to paint, or you know how to draw, or you know how to sculpt, or you know how to dance, or you know how to sing. That didn't happen overnight. Your curiosity was piqued, and you began moving into the direction of reiteration. But it was first from a place of inspiration, more than likely, from a parent, from a show, from a friend. You were piqued. If you don't believe me, just ask Taylor Malky about her artwork, to put her on the spot. She's Miss Artist. We learn to pray, and then we learn to play, and we learn to draw by doing those things. Some of us, I think, struggle with prayer because we want to become proficient overnight. That is not how it works. It's a slow movement of reiteration and repetition over time by simply doing it. We learn to pray by praying. So Jesus is quite literally assuming that kingdom people, his apprentices and his practitioners, his disciples, his students, of whom we are to be, have a built-in rhythm, habit, and dare I say, a ritual of prayer. Because he doesn't say if you pray, but when you pray. There is an assumption that you and I and that the disciples and kingdom people across the world and time have a rhythm and habit and ritual of prayer. Sophia Fasua, who was one of my seminary professors, says this: for the Jews of Jesus' day, religious practices, including prayer, were not an option or an aspiration. They were an expectation. Let me clear the air. Jesus expects us to pray. Our Father expects us to pray. It is not an option as followers of the way of Jesus. It is an expectation. Let me just encourage you with this as you consider this teaching from Jesus. Because of the shifting sands of culture and radical individualism, we can feel and sense isolation, insecurity, uncertainty, and instability. And yet, communal rituals have the ability to stabilize our life. Communal rituals have the ability to stabilize and anchor our life. Byung-Chul Han, who is a Korean philosopher, has a little short book called The Disappearance of Rituals. And in the very first chapter, he has these words to say about the importance of rituals. I think this is super helpful and quite profound. Rituals transform being in the world into a being at home. In life, things, objective things, serve as stabilizing resting points. Rituals serve the same purpose. Through their self-sameness, their repetitiveness, they stabilize life. They make life last. Now, whether you know this or not, when we talk about rule of life, rhythm of life, rituals, some of you think, man, that's not me. That's a far stretch from where I am in my journey. I have to say, friend, I disagree. You have a ritual. You have rituals. You have habits. And you have a rule. The question is, what is it? And I think for us in our time, with the fast pace of society and the shifting sands of culture and this sort of radical individualism, that we need communal rituals to anchor us as time goes by quicker and quicker. And we move at a faster pace. Some of us need some stability in our life. And we need to be anchored as the waves come and go. You know, prayer, I didn't know this until this past week. Prayer actually comes from the Latin word precarious. Precarious. We often pray, and some of us only pray, because life is precarious. Is it not? Quite precarious. Meaning that life is, quote unquote, not securely held or in position. Or is, quote unquote, dependent on circumstances beyond one's control. Life is precarious, so we pray. And ritualizing prayer stabilizes our precarious life, unlike any form of spiritual discipline and rhythm. And I don't want you this morning to be afraid of the word ritual. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of the word religion. You ever heard people say Jesus is just all about relationship, not religion? That's actually not all true. That's not all true. Jesus was a devout Jew, highly religious. Yes, he's about intimacy and relationship, 100%. But religion is about a commitment to something beyond yourself that involves habit, rituals, and practices. Dare I say, we're all religious people. Some of you watch shows on Netflix religiously. Some of you follow teams and watch games religiously. Some of you are fans of certain celebrities and you follow them religiously. You have certain interests and hobbies that you do religiously. Some of you go to the gym religiously. That is not me. But it's a religion for you. CrossFit is a religion. In the 1970s, the missiologist and philosopher Leslie Newbigin predicted that in the West, we would not become irreligious. We might think we're becoming irreligious. We're not. He just says we're going to move to a place in which politics become the religion of the day. You want to see religion? Watch highlights of the RNC. Go watch the DNC. Religion is among us. We are religious people. It's anthropologically a part of who we are as human beings. Across the world, we are religious. Don't be afraid of it. The question is always, who or what ideas, person, or thoughts are you committed to? And do they hold up? Are they grounded? Are they true? Are they anchored? So do not be afraid of the word ritual and religion. If you had a ritual of checking in for 10 minutes daily with a friend, family member, or spouse, just checking in daily by saying, hey, how's it going? How are you? How's life? How are you feeling? I promise intimacy, companionship, trust, and communication would increase. I promise it would. If you had that sort of ritual. So don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of monotony. 90% of Jesus' life was monotonous, obscure. He remained anonymous. We're in a season in the liturgical calendar called ordinary time. The majority of the liturgical calendar is about monotony, about God in the small things, about God in the mundane. Majority of your week is at work. Are you with God at work? Or with your kids, or with your friends, and your family? We have to create spaces for rituals to anchor us in our life. Then Jesus encourages us to create space, a designated time and place for being with God. It says, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Go into your room. You can infer here that he is calling us to consecrate or sanctify a time and a place for prayer, to set it apart, to dedicate it for prayer. A space of focused attention and communication with our Father. When a person speaks of their prayer closet, do any of you have a prayer closet? Okay, this is why we're doing this teaching series. It's good. Some of you have people you know, grandmas, grandpas, moms, dads, friends. They have prayer closets. Sticky notes all over the wall, pillows on the ground, a lamp, a candle, whatever it may be. The idea of a prayer closet comes from this text. One translation says, go into your inner room. The Greek word is referencing the storehouse in the center of a home, a pantry or a closet in the center of a home in the ancient Jewish world. It also connotes the place of your most valuable possessions, the only place in the entire home that would have a lock on it. The inner room would be like a vault in the center of the home. And Jesus says, go into the vault, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Later, the Greek word connotes the notion of a bedroom. A bedroom. The place of greatest privacy and deepest intimacy. When people come over to your home for dinner, you might clean the living room. You might clean the kitchen. But there's one place often you're not going to let someone go, and that's your bedroom. And that might be because it's a little bit dirty and messy, and all the rest of the dirt from the home, all the clutter is in the bedroom. But it's also the place of deep intimacy and privacy. He is calling us to go into the most intimate space of our home. And I think it's a physical call, but it's also a spiritual call to go deep into the depths of our soul, into our heart. As St. Teresa of Avila calls it, the interior castle, to the highest point, the deepest point of your being, the closet, the storehouse of your life. Go into that place. And as people who have been regenerated or made new by the Spirit of God, the most inner place of our life is the holiest of holies. And he invites us into that inner place, but we need also a physical place as well. Prayer overflows from intimacy, and it cultivates intimacy. So it's a twofold action. Overflow from intimacy and cultivation of intimacy. So as you're kind of noticing, this is kind of like let's just get our appetites, wet for the rest of the disciples' prayer. We need to start thinking about a rhythm of prayer before we even go through how to pray. You tracking with me? The first question you need to ask today, I'm going to be very practical. And sometimes my teachings aren't practical, and I get that. That's okay. Because high ideas trickle down at some point. I promise you that. All right? The first question that you have to ask yourself today, and I want you to wrestle with this question, and I kind of hinted at it earlier, and I saw the response. Where is your room? Where or what is your prayer room? Where or what is your place of prayer? Physical place. If I were to ask you this afternoon, where is your room? What would you say? I might pick some of you randomly after the service. Hey, buddy, where's your room? Where's your place? It could be a chair. For me, if you want to know my prayer spot, here in the church, which is here. Sometimes it's the sanctuary. The sanctuary is Corey's domain. This whole room is his prayer room. I come in here and pray sometimes, but you can actually visibly see my prayer room, my chair, so to speak. If you go and look at the couch in the community room and look at the far side near the bookstore, there are seams that are ripping from where I sit with the Lord and with people. But that is my space. That's where I sit with the Lord. And there's a visible representation of my space. I've seen it happen over the last 2 years, just slowly begin to rip. That's my place where I spend time with the Lord. A chair, an office, a window, a drive, a song, a park, a camp, or retreat center. What is your place? Do you have a dedicated place for prayer? John Wesley's mother, Susanna, had a kneeling desk. Take a look at this piece of vintage furniture right here, this kneeling desk. Look at that. That is some kind of antique right there. It's a chair that actually folds down into a desk. That is so functional. Wow. With a kneeling pad and everything. That was her place of prayer. And interestingly enough, John Wesley, eventually, you can go to the new room in Bristol, in the museum, and you can actually see his prayer desk and his bench as well. I believe that John saw his mom with a rhythm and habit of prayer in a place and modeled his prayer life after his mother. What is your place? I know that Mallory and Jordan Evans, they're at the beach this week. They're enjoying their life with family. But Mallory has talked about this a lot. She turned her laundry room into her prayer room at her house. That's her place of prayer. My dad had a rocking chair. I'm pretty sure my dad only prayed when he was in that rocking chair. It's an old rocking chair. That was his place of prayer. Zach Armfield has St. Francis Retreat Center. If he hasn't talked to you about it yet, he will. Corey Culp and Chris Miller have Victory Mountain Camp. Chris Miller has spent a week out there by himself on 140 acres where there is nothing. It's a place to go be with God. Josh Leroy used to have one of those pre-built sheds from Lowe's. He turned into a prayer hermitage on his property. Now he just has a room attached to his house. Thank God he's got AC now because he spends a lot of time in prayer. What is your place? What is your room and where is it? Ancient Celtic Christians called these types of places thin places. Places where the distinction between heaven and earth was very thin. Where the boundary is permeable. Here's one definition of a thin place. Those rare locales where the distance between heaven and earth collapses. Where's your thin place? Where's your room? When you have a dedicated place of prayer, the beautiful thing is all you have to do is show up. I mentioned this last week. 99% of prayer is showing up. And when you have a dedicated place, all you have to do is have a declaration of intent by being in that place. And when you do, you're saying, I may not want to be here. Or I might want to be here. But regardless, I'm here. All of me is here. I'm in my place. It anchors us once again. And because it is a space that has been dedicated or consecrated, you and I show up with higher expectations of his presence. If you have a dedicated prayer space, when you show up, you're going to have a higher expectation of God's presence being more tangible in that place. Now, we know it's not, but for us, there's something about a sacred, set-apart space and place and time, which I'll get to in a second, that when we step into it, we have this sort of psychological shift where we expect God to be there. For a long time, I went through praying without my shoes on. I'd take my shoes off, step into, at that point, it was my daughter's nursery in our old home. I'd step in to the place and light a candle. It was as though I was saying, whatever's going on in here and in life, I'm here. I'm present. So find a place. Take your shoes off if you need to. Light a candle. But you need to have a dedicated place. The second question is, do you close the door? Do you close the door? This is a question of time. Becoming a person of prayer and cultivating a life of prayer does happen by accident. It doesn't happen by accident or unintentionally. You just overnight become a person of prayer. That's not how it works. It requires not only intentional physical space, I believe, but carved out space in time, both in quality and quantity. Both are required. And what we are after as the people of God is a movement from talking to God to talking with God, where it's a dialogue back and forth, to a life of being with God. Talking to God, to talking with God, to a life of being with God. What the Carmelite monk, Brother Lawrence, called the practice of the presence of God. Or what Paul, Silas, and Timothy called praying without ceasing. But that doesn't happen overnight, friends. A time of focused attention on God, short and long, launches us into a life of living with and ultimately from the Spirit. You know, we live for Jesus, but we live from the Spirit. Our life is lived for Jesus, but we live our life from His Spirit. And Jesus urges us not only to go into our inner room, but to also close the door. And in an age of constant distractions, reels, feeds, TikToks, shorts, streams, news, emails, notifications, and dopamine overload, many of us have lost the ability to pause and stop, if only for 5 minutes. Economists now speak of what's referred to as the attention economy. We've moved out of an information economy to an attention-based economy, where human attention, our attention, is a scarce commodity sold on an open market. Your social behaviors on a digital platform are being marketed and sold on an open market. Multinational corporations spend billions of dollars solely to take your attention. Blaise Pascal, the 18th century philosopher, famously said, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." Try this week to sit in a room alone for about 20 minutes. You'll find yourself start to twitch a little bit, start to tease up. Closing the door in our time is a subversive act when everyone around us is vying for our attention. But I think it requires two things. Again, super practical. Putting prayer in our calendar. If you want prayer to be a rhythm in your life, and it's assumed as a follower of Jesus that it is, it has to be in our calendar. And we have to leave our phone outside of our dedicated place. So put prayer in your calendar and leave the phone outside of that place. We need the notification to pray. We do. And we need to at least take our phone off of our person and set it across the room. These are two very practical steps for us. And everyone's starting point today as we consider prayer as a rhythm is going to be different. And there's so much grace for where you are today when it comes to prayer and the rhythm of prayer. But I love this great little line from Pete Greig where he says about prayer, keep it simple, keep it real, keep it up. Keep it simple, keep it real, keep it up. But always ask yourself, what is my next step? What is my next step? Where am I? What's my next step? I'm not encouraging you to travail in prayer for 2 hours a day. I'm not asking that. I'm not asking you to do centering prayer for 45 minutes. Some of you have gotten to that place in your life. Just ask Josh Leroy about it. I'm not there. Start simple. But always ask, what's my next step? Some of you have started simple, but you haven't taken a next step in a decade, or 5 years, or maybe longer, or 20 years. To provide some insight into my own life and my rhythm, what I try to do in terms of rule, what I have in my calendar, what I try to keep, and it changes, but it's a rhythm. Every morning, I do the lectionary text. And I meditate and journal for about 15 to 30 minutes with coffee. That's what I do every morning. The lectionary text, I read it, I meditate on it. I'm not studying the scriptures. I'm just letting the scriptures form me. I journal and I sit in it for 15 to 30 minutes every single morning. That's my desire. That's what I'm after. It's in my calendar. The middle of the day, I like to have what I call a praise break, where I just throw on a song of praise, honor, adoration, and thanksgiving to the Lord. And sometimes this happens, sometimes this doesn't, but this is my goal. Every day, middle of the day, it might be, 12, 1, something. Stop what I'm doing and try to listen to a song of praise and honor and worship that I have to verbally sing to the Lord. The third thing that I try to do at the end of the evening is to do a prayer of examine, which I just listen to with Jordan often as best we can, the Lectio 365 at the end of the night, and allow that to put me to sleep. Listening to the words from that meditation and that examined prayer. That's a very simple approach, morning, noon, and night. And it's not perfect and it changes, but that's my rhythm. Now also, I hope to once a week take a walk within nature and speak to the Lord. Specifically, I try to take notice of birds as a way of being present to the Lord. The next thing that I will try to do often is if I can, once a month, is to have a half day away at a park. Get away outside and be with the Lord in nature. Some of you connect with the Lord in nature. That's beautiful. So these are just examples of what I try to do in my life. I'm not perfect, but that's kind of built into my rhythm. Now, I also realize that we don't all have the same kind of control over what consumes our time as others might. Especially if you're a stay-at-home parent with kids. You are a modern monastic. Well done. Time is not your own. There is a lot of grace for you. But here's my encouragement for you as you consider a rhythm of prayer. Every time you go to the bathroom, if you're able to go to the bathroom with kids, and if you're able, close the door and recite the Lord's Prayer. Every time you go to the bathroom, try to close the door if you can and recite the Lord's Prayer. Or when you are in the car, maybe with the kids, try to listen to some worship music or music of praise and honor and adoration. Practical little steps for us who are submitting all of our time to those other than ourselves. But always ask yourself, as I said, what is my next step? Now, I love Eugene Peterson's paraphrase of this text in The Message. I think it's super helpful. Here's what Eugene Peterson paraphrases this text. Or here's how he paraphrases it. He says, here's what I want you to do. Find a quiet, secluded place so you won't be tempted to role play before God. Just be there as simply and honestly as you can manage. The focus will shift from you to God and you will begin to sense His grace. I think that most of us wrestle with prayer, not because of desire or even willingness, but we find it boring, hard, and difficult, often because we view it as a role play before God. We view prayer as a performance before God. And it's not a performance. Prayer is a gift. It is the means of relationship with the divine. And it's a means to an end. It's not the end, but it is the means of intimacy and relationship with God. David Benner calls it the native language of the soul. It is the most natural form of communication for a human person. A distinguishing mark between the rest of the animal kingdom. We have the gift of communicating and communing with our Creator. To listen to Him and to speak with Him. It is a distinguishing mark, but it is not a performance. If prayer is a performance for you today, I'm praying release of that disposition in Jesus' name. It is not. It is a gift. Now, my in-laws have had a rhythm for years to go on a walk every evening on the Chinkapin Trail in rural Rockingham County. In Jesus' name. It's about a 1-mile pilgrimage. No, I'm just kidding. It's not a pilgrimage. It's just a walk through the woods. But every night they would go, and I spent the whole summer living with them as I was interning in college. And Jordan was there. We would all go every single night to go walk the dogs on the Chinkapin Trail. It's a rhythm. And one time I said, I don't really want to go. Jordan's father later on said to Jordan, are you sure you want to marry him? Because I chose something else. But it was habitual. Jordan says, this is what we do. We go on walks in the evening. If you ask my wife, what does she love to do? She loves to go on walks. It's like she's a 75-year-old woman. I love to go on walks. And now I love to go on walks too. But it was a habit. It was a rhythm. And throughout the entire library of the Scriptures, there is a constant picture of walking with God. Walking with Jesus. Walking in the Spirit. And certainly there is a moral piece to it. But the primary connotation of walking with God is witness, communion, intimacy, companionship, relationship, and prayer. For those of us who examine our life and examine this morning's invitation to walk with God in prayer, we might feel as though prayer in our life is non-existent, or there is no rhythm or rule, let alone desire. I encourage you with 3 things if you desire to walk with God. Dedicate a place. Dedicate a time. Ideally 3 times a day. And the third thing I would encourage you with, and I'll close with this, is read people who write from places of encounter. Immerse yourself into people who have written on their encounters with God. Now, there are many in this community, as I've said, who have sought to create a culture of prayer, and it comes from a place of private devotion, overflow, and encounter. One of those people, I've already mentioned his name, is Corey Heath, who got a fresh new haircut yesterday, by the way. Make sure you compliment him on his haircut. That brother comes from a place of overflow, private devotion to God, seeking the Lord's presence. He sends me texts all week long of things that God's telling him, scriptures that are speaking to him. But what's interesting for Corey, he's always had a heart for the people of God, for the lost, for the scriptures, and for the presence. But I remember a few years ago, Corey took a shift in his formation journey. He stepped into deeper waters, and a turn was made towards hungering for renewal and revival. And that started by him beginning to read an old revivalist by the name of Leonard Ravenhill. Ravenhill wrote from a place of encounter, writing on the powerful work of the presence of God and what it means to be a people who seek after the things of God, expecting God to show up and revive his bride, revive his church. And he would write with great conviction and authority. And I saw Corey take a turn a few years ago. And so what you see now, I think, in some ways began turning a few years ago. And now Corey is this kind of prophetic watchman for our community, pursuing the way of the Spirit and the access and power that comes with it. So we are to read people who write from encounter. And when we do, it does something to us. Their testimony stokes the embers of our heart. So I want to wrap things up with this quote from Leonard Ravenhill. Rather strong quote from this very strong evangelist from the UK in the mid-20th century. Poverty-stricken as the church is today in many things, she is most stricken here in the place of prayer. We have many organizers, but few agonizers. Many players and payers, few prayers. Many singers, few clingers. Lots of pastors, few wrestlers. Many fears, few tears. Much fashion, little passion. Many interferers, few intercessors. Many riders, but few fighters. Failing here, we fail everywhere. The secret of praying is praying in secret. A sinning man will stop praying, and a praying man will stop sinning. No man is greater than his prayer life. Exodus 25, Yahweh speaks of the altar of incense, not just as a place of sacrifice, but as a place for meeting with him. It has become a dedicated place for the community over thousands of years to meet with God. But Jesus is calling you and I today to make altars in our private lives, places of meeting with him. As Susan Kent says, it is the altar where our lives are altered. Thin places are where heaven and earth collide, but altars are where the sacred meets our surrender, where our heart is open to the one who is nearer than our breath. So may we today dedicate places and times of prayer in our lives as altars of meeting with the Lord, because the depths of your being longs for being with your Creator God. Let us pray.